Hi, everybody. This is Lonnie Huffer with Trend Micro, Senior Product Marketing Manager, Cyber Insurance. And with me today, I have James Ingram from Arch Insurance UK, a Cybersecurity Risk Engineer. And we are on part 6 of our Cyber Insurance webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about comprehensive security strategy and risk planning. And what does that really entail? And this is coming from an insurance angle. And this is really to help you as the organization figure out what you can do to help better yourselves in your position when you're securing your cyber insurance policy. So James, thank you for joining me today yet again. And today we're going to talk about some things that have actually come up on the trend side a lot. A lot of questions around how do I as an insured work with a vendor when I'm procuring a policy? And I'm talking about vendors on the legal side, on the incident response side, maybe even restoration and recovery, those types of things. And so I just wanted to get your feedback today on just a couple of questions, because these are the questions that have come up the most with us. So, we have customers who want Trend to do the IR should and when an incident occurs. Now, the unfortunate part is most of them don't know that there are some steps that need to happen in order to kind of make that scenario happen. And that is when the policy is first procured. So my first question to you is, when it comes to adding vendors to an insurance policy, is it best to do it at the time that you're adopting the policy, or, let's say a couple months are down the road and you're like, oh, shoot, I really wanted Trend to be my preferred IR vendor. Can I get them added to my insurance policy, or do I have to wait until I renew again? We've heard from other brokers and or carriers out there that yes, you can, no, you can't. So I just want to get your perspective on how Arch sees that, and what is the right way, I guess, to go about it.
It must be extremely frustrating, because I would say that it's like you said a minute ago, it's different. It changes every single time in terms of every carrier will do this slightly differently. Every insurer like Arch will do it slightly differently. And I suppose it's a bit like a service that they offer, and like any service we get in all walks of life, different companies are going to differ in how that service is applied. So in general, yes, if you want to use a particular vendor to conduct forensics and to do your incident response and everything else, best time to do it is pre-buying this in, before you agree the policy. Say to your broker, this is who I want to use. They will then let their carriers know that this is what the company has requested, and then the carrier can then make the decision and say, yes, fine, no problem at all. They'll do all the onboarding and everything else that needs to be done. If it's someone like Trend, there'll be no work. It'll just be, yeah, there's no problem at all. But it doesn't matter who it is, just let them know. If it's just after the policy, great. At the end of the day, what you don't want it to be is after something's gone bang. When everything is falling apart around you, you then don't want to be having that conversation, ideally. So yeah, any time prior to that is best, but at the time you're binding the policy, perfect timing. Some carriers are very strict about who they use. They have partnerships with people, they have agreements, they have rates and everything else. And it's this tangled web, and they might say, no, you need to use one of ours. Others are completely the other side of that, and they're completely free, and they just go, I don't care who you use. Just Arch kind of sit in the middle of that. We work in a hybrid model. We offer some, but we also say, if you have any, let us know. We'll onboard them, no problem at all. So we try and balance the two sides.
Okay, so for those of you watching this, it's at time of policy adoption. So if you want to utilize Trend as your preferred IR vendor, make sure you let your broker know up front so they can write it in and check with the carriers that are out there. You heard James said they love trend, so we're a go. But the other part of that too is I have seen this and heard this from some of our customers as well, that when they choose to write in their own preferred IR vendor, that particular carrier has come back and said, great, we'll do it, but we're going to give you a reduced policy limit. Now, my assumption is that that's just carrier based and will vary carrier to carrier. Is that a common practice? Is it just relative to the industry? It sounds like Arch doesn't kind of fall into that slot. So again, for those of you watching, Arch doesn't fall into that slot. But what has your experience been with kind of hearing those types of things? And what would you say to an insured? If they really wanted Trend, for example, to be their IR vendor, but it reduces their policy limit by $2 million. I mean, is that really, I hate to say this, in the best interest of the customer? I don't know.
At that point, if you've got to ask yourself a question in terms of why are they saying no? Like what's their reasoning? And it might be that these insurers just have rate agreements and agreements in place with these others that give them a benefit to use those. So in which case that might not have your best interests in mind potentially. I'm not saying that's absolute fact. Every one of these cases is going to be slightly different, but I think for someone like Trend, especially if they're your kind of your MDR provider and they're your EDR provider, there is a certain sense of kind of syncope there. If they then come in and try and defend and help recover your systems, it makes sense. I would say talk to your broker and say why is this happening? Why are they reducing my limits? I want to use Trend, and at the point that you are renewing your policy, changing your policy, make sure you bring it up and say, I do not want this anymore. I want to be able to use Trend or whoever it might be that you're asking for. I want to be able to use them, and they will make sure that they find a carrier like Arch who will make sure that's not a problem.
Okay, so just to kind of tie this all together for all of you, when we talk about maybe what's the benefit of doing that up front, and I say this from the perspective of this happened unfortunately to a customer of ours, where they did not take the action of adding Trend as the preferred IR vendor, and they suffered from an incident, and their losses were much higher than they anticipated, and so they went to go file a claim, several weeks after the fact, and they were trying to get reimbursed for utilizing Trend IR services. And because we were not added to the policy at the time of adoption, and because we were not on panel with that particular carrier, that customer unfortunately was not able, to my knowledge, to get reimbursed for those things. So, we're really trying to help you all fortify yourselves against an incident when it occurs, that if you do want Trend to be the IR vendor of choice, just get us added to that policy. And James, just to clarify, is there more difficulty in trying to get us added after you've already said yes to the policy, and you after the fact are like, oh shoot, I need to have Trend added as my IR vendor? Is there going to be more difficulty with getting us added in, say a month after the fact?
Yeah, but potentially it's always easy to do it before, because then if that carrier refuses, you can then go elsewhere. Whereas, as you said, some carriers, everyone carrier does it slightly differently. Some carriers are very strict about their panel, and that they'll have 2 or 3 that they use, and they're the ones that have to be used at all times. So long as you're aware that's the case before binding your insurance with them. Whereas, but some are completely the opposite way. But I would say if you can do it before, definitely best. And I think on your point about the customer that suffered an incident, one thing I'd say to to those listening is, if you have cyber insurance and you suffer an incident, even if you think it's going to be a relatively small contained incident, phone that claims line, that breach coach, whoever it might be, the line that it says on your insurance, if you have an incident, phone it, just phone it. Most of the time, I can't speak for every the difficulty of me speaking like this is every single carrier does it slightly differently, so I can't speak for everyone. My suggestion is go and look at your policy and it'll tell you, but most of the time you'll end up on a call with a breach coach, and they will do a triage call and they'll say, all right, what's going on? Have you got it in hand? Have you got someone looking after you? What do you need? And that they might just go, sounds like you've got it all in hand. I'm not needed at the moment. I'll give you a call back in 2 days. If you're still struggling, we'll work something out. Or they might go, actually, no, I'm sorry, you haven't got this in hand. And and from an insurance perspective, let's get our vendors on. Let's do this. Let's do that. So it can't. Normally that call, again, I can't speak for everyone. Normally that first call and that triage call isn't costed into your insurance. You don't have to pay for it. So the earlier that call goes in, the more protected you're going to be.
Okay, no, that's great. I don't think, well, I know I didn't know that. So hopefully you guys took away something from that too. So just because you're calling that number doesn't mean you're automatically filing a claim, right? I think the consensus among customers is that if I call that number, that means I'm starting the claim process. And what you just said is no, you can have that triage call to figure out where you sit, and that's to better help protect yourselves from making a misstep, or getting a third set of eyes on it to really assess the situation, who have gone through multiple events like this, and that breach coach will be able to really help you say, yes, you absolutely need to engage it, or no, you're fine, just keep doing what you're doing, and checking back in with you. So thank you so much for highlighting that, James. I think that is a really key part to kind of understanding all of this. I guess my next question is, when we look at companies that are out there that are either getting cyber insurance for the first time, or maybe you've had a policy for a couple of years and renewals coming up, are there steps a business can take to ensure that they're meeting a carrier's requirements to get the best possible policy for themselves? And that might be a loaded question because every carrier is different, but there has to be some common ground somewhere, right? And so what, I know we've talked about this in previous sessions where, there are all these controls that carriers look at, right? And each carrier essentially looks at the same set of controls, but maybe not all of them, right? So I'd love to get your perspective on that. Maybe some examples on how Arch looks at things, but then just the market overall.
Yeah, no problem. I suppose in general, on a macro basis, your cybersecurity posture is going to be directly linked with the premium and coverage that you're going to get provided in your policy. So the more mature you are on the cyber side, probably the lower your premiums and the more coverage you're going to get in general.
So let's talk about that for a hot second. You say more mature. What are some examples of a company that's sitting at that more mature cybersecurity posture, or has an elevated cybersecurity posture that you look at favorably?
There's so many. So let's say from a backup perspective, you've got standard kind of just on-prem backups that are attached to the network and those kind of things, or then the extra step might be offline, offsite, protected, immutable, those kind of things. So that you see the standards go up. Yeah. Endpoint protection, that's an obvious one. I don't know why I didn't think of that first. Endpoint protection. You can have a great EDR platform, brilliant. But then on top of that, what modules in addition to that have you got deployed? How are you monitoring them? How have you implemented them? Did you have an external party come in to assess that and to improve and do the configuration? It's those kind of things. It's not just having the product, it's how you've implemented it and all the extras that go around it. That's where that creep into the highest maturity will be effective.
And so just for those of you listening, we'll go over this in some other detail, but some of those controls that we talk about or are, having those active and tested incident response plan, having a PAM solution, having EDR, XDR, doing that security awareness training for your employees, having MFA, that's another big one, right? What did you say? That's probably like one of the standard ones along with like EDR, right? You've got to have MFA.
Yep.
Backups, as James mentioned, 24/7 monitoring. That's another one. Segmented networks. Trying to think what else is on that list. So those are just some ideas around some of those controls that carriers are looking at. If you've got Trend Vision 1, there are at least 6 controls that platform automatically satisfies. Most notably, stuff around end-of-life systems and virtual patching and vulnerability management. That's another big one. How are you managing those? How are you prioritizing them? If you've got Vision 1, we're already doing it for you. But as James said, adding those layers on top. So maybe for those of you who haven't looked at the ASRM module yet, that would be like another layer on top of XDR, for example, that's giving you more visibility and then is showing a carrier like Arch that you've got a heightened cybersecurity posture, in addition to multiple types of telemetry. So endpoint is great, but if you're pulling in email and network, especially, network's going to allow you to see that bad traffic before it hits the endpoint. So that means your company is now at lesser risk because you have that visibility to that bad traffic before it affects the endpoint and all chaos, breaks loose. So are there other things in your mind that maybe kind of fall into that category of, I tend to look at things from a cyber policy, more from a technological standpoint of what a company has in their security stack. Are there other things that kind of sit outside of that a carrier would look at as well to kind of tie in with how they decide or when they decide to underwrite an organization or approve them for this premium or this policy amount?
Absolutely, yeah. I tend to focus on the controls as well because obviously that's my wheelhouse. But absolutely, there are other things. So that there's kind of sanitation of data and collection of data. There's the privacy side. Cyber policies will trigger with privacy issues as well. So it's how they're managing that element. Are you collecting data you shouldn't be? Are you managing that data inappropriately? Are you keeping data for unreasonable length of time? Just your data management, that's a really important element because normally a policy is based on size of business and your industry. So, and then data storage. So they're the two kind of the elements of a policy. You've got your BI in terms of revenue, so your revenue disruption, and you've got your exposure from a data and privacy perspective and liability. So we need to see both of those being protected as much as we can, or as tidied up as much as we can. I suppose outside the controls as well, we've then got having the right people in the right places. Have you got someone managing your information risk? Have you got a CISO in place? It obviously depends on the size of the company, but is what you have in place appropriate for your industry or your company would be the question going through an underwriter's mind.
Okay. And you brought up a really good point with, based on the size of your organization and the amount of data that you hold, and if you have certain people in place, like I guess my question is, if you saw a company who, I don't know, I'm assuming a company that does over 100 million, you would assume that they have a CISO in place, or is there like a cap? Does it depend on how big the company is?
It's really difficult based on revenue because the industry comes into it and everything else because you get some of these crazy wealth managers you've got like 10 people working for them, but they earn over 100 million or something. And so I wouldn't expect them to have a CISO. but it really depends on almost. It's probably more linked to the size of people in terms of employees. That's probably an easier way to link it in terms of size. So up to a certain amount of employees is probably an easy way to break it out.
Okay.
But we don't break that out as far as exposure goes, because then that becomes more complex. It's a tangled web.
Okay. So I guess my takeaway for all of you watching this is, think about the size of your organization, the number of employees you have, and then we'll insert a slide in here somewhere to show you those controls so you know what I'm talking about. But think about those controls that you have, which ones you don't, and what other ones you might be able to add into your security strategy and risk planning to be able to kind of meet those requirements that these carriers are looking at. And really, it's there to help you fortify your defenses as well. James will talk a lot about defense in depth. I'm sure you're all aware of it. It's just another piece of it. But again, that's where you can engage some of those breach coaches as well. And they'll help you figure out where some of those other gaps are. If you are a very data heavy company where you had a lot of PII that you have to store, you might be missing a key part of some type of security protocol that they can help you understand and get implemented to help you effectively get a better policy and get something that fits your business. Now, I think one of the other things that we probably didn't talk about, and we might talk about in a future session, is when we talk about all of these controls and getting all of these additional layers on, right, to show, an enhanced cybersecurity posture. What is the benefit of that to a company? The first thing in my head says, well, if I've got more controls, that means I'm less of a risk, so I should get a better premium, right? Or I should get a better policy limit. Is that true, or am I just way off base?
No, in general, it is. There's two elements that go into it: is your kind of cyber risk, and then your in what you do in your industry. You're not really going to change that. So the one thing that you can change is your cyber risk, and that's what the underwriter is going to be writing for. So if you can reduce your cyber risk, you in general will reduce your policy, your premiums, and potentially improve your coverage and your limits and everything else that go alongside it. So yes,
Okay.
they definitely work in a kind of an inverse way.
Perfect. And so when, let's say, I tend to think of like, cyber insurance and car insurance in tandem, but, it's like car insurance, you get reevaluated every 6 months. And that doesn't seem to be the case right now, at least with cyber insurance. It's done on a yearly basis. So if I'm an organization that's making a big improvement to some of my cybersecurity solutions or protocols or processes, if I'm doing that halfway through my policy term, and am I going to get any benefit by notifying my broker or carrier that I've done this? Or is it really I have to wait until my renewal period to be like, oh yes, okay, we finally got this. So now what? And I guess the other question is let's say I am like renewing my policy, right? And let's say I know I'm going to be doing this a month after my policy renews. Is there benefit to me telling you, the broker, you, the carrier, that we are going to be implementing this, and would that affect my policy? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. If there's going to be any major changes to your security stack, definitely let them know at the point of renewal or prior to renewal, because an underwriter will look at that and think, okay, how much of that year, if it's going to be you're renewing the 1st of January and it's going to be finished by February, that's a lot of the year. It's going to be protected by that new control, new systems. The underwriters take that into account. However, if you renew on the 1st of January and it's not be ready till November, they're probably going to wash their hands of it until the following renewal period. But so it really just depends on what the impact of that change is going to be and how much of the year that underwriter is going to get the benefit out of. So, but definitely let them know. On a more sentimental basis, it proves to us that that the company's moving in the right direction. They're trying to improve. They've got that forward momentum, and that's a nice subjective thing to see, and that will give the underwriter a bit of a warm fuzzy feeling. And there is a lot of subjectiveness in the way cyber is underwritten.
Okay.
So it's not as binary or factual as some other lines, because the stats and data just isn't there it's very difficult to assess one company against another because everyone is different. So yeah, any warm fuzzy feeling you can give an underwriter, provide that detail.
Okay, and I guess maybe the last question I have for you, and I don't know if we've talked about this in other sessions or not, but if I'm filling out an insurance application, and let's say I can't even think of anything off the top of my head that wouldn't be included on an insurance application, but let's, for better lack of words, like, you and I both know that XDR is better than EDR, right? But most insurance applications just ask if you have EDR. So if I'm the next step above that and I have an XDR platform, how do I communicate that with my carrier or broker on my insurance application? Like, do you or do carriers in general see something like XDR as another layer or another step above EDR that would affect how they see that insured during the underwriting process?
Yes, they absolutely should. I can't speak for all carriers, and there are probably some carriers who maybe are underwriting it from a very insurance base rather than a kind of technical cyber way. They won't see the difference, but good big carriers, I don't want to use the word good is a terrible word to use. Carriers with technical understanding will know the difference, and they definitely will underwrite the difference. And my recommendation is if the application, and we've all seen them, only ask for, do you have EDR, yes, no, and then move on, and you've got XDR and you've got these modules deployed and you're so proud of your network, I would say shout it from the rooftops. That's the thing, like, write it down on every form that goes out there. There'll normally be comments boxes. Spill everything on there. And I know that's come back to what I've said on so many of our chats, but use those comments boxes. Tell everyone, because it's going to be good information for the underwriter. It's not going to affect you negatively. So write it.
Okay. So, and I just want to reiterate to what James said, like, if you don't have enough room on the comment box, throw in a PowerPoint, send over a Word doc with all of the great stuff that you have in there, because, as James will say and has said, the more the merrier, right? They want to see that. And you're really shorting yourselves if you aren't sharing that information and just, what I'll say, doing the bare minimum on those insurance applications. Again, that's why we're developing some of those cyber insurance reports for you all as well, to help you tell that story better. They want to know what your mean time to patch is. They want to know that the tool that you're using is helping you to prioritize those vulnerabilities that are in your environment. They want to know, how many assets you have and how many sensors have been deployed. Just for everybody on the call, that number should be over 90%. That's a good number. If it's below that, then you're probably in trouble. And then MFA, you all know that we don't do MFA, but we can report on it in Vision 1. And that's really a key metric for these insurance carriers as well, to be able to see some of that information. And if you have ASRM, if you have the XDR platform, even if you have our new threat intel feed coming in, those are things that you should be sharing with your carrier and your broker, because it's showing an enhanced cybersecurity posture. And those are the things that are going to lead to you all getting a better premium and a better policy. So James, anything else that you would like to leave the audience with today before we say goodbye?
For this one, I think we have covered everything, because I've managed to get my typical make sure you fill those comments boxes comment out. That's the one I always try and get out at last minute. So I think on this one we've covered everything I needed to say.
Okay, perfect. All right. So with that, thank you everybody for watching today. James, thank you so much for taking all of this time with me to go through all of these sessions. I hope all of you took away something useful and helpful and can help drive your business even further. And again, if you have any questions after these sessions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Vince Kearns or your salesperson who can get in contact with us as well. James, thank you so much. And I'll be talking to you again soon.